Hi Jackie, can you introduce yourself for me?
I am Jaki Booth. I am the Chief Exec of Sheffield Students' Union.
Thank you. And just walk me through your career history, please.
Okay. So I've been involved in about 8 student unions across the years as a student and a staff member. I was a student at Surrey University for a term, and I joined 3 societies, of course, but they weren't my cup of tea, and I left and I became a student at Birmingham, where I was an officer in 1984, 1985, so during the miners' strike, which was interesting for a right-wing student union at the time, or guild at the time. We didn't manage to get any policy passed that supported the miners, so that was fascinating. I finished my degree, which was in commerce, and I couldn't decide whether to work in the arts or in student unions. I didn't really know student unions existed before, so I'd always had my sights on the arts. And I applied for jobs in both. And I was made the first full-time administrator, the first full-time staff member at what was then Derbyshire College of Higher Education Students' Union, which is the longest title in the sector, I think. And I was everything to everyone. We had 6 or 7 other staff. They were all part-time. They were secretaries, bookkeepers, and shop assistants. And I basically did everything that anyone else in the organisation might need to do. So I ordered stock, I supported the student groups, I looked after the democracy, I did the books, we had a bookkeeper, but I produced the first ever set of accounts we had. I learned so much. And I was really successful and surprised to then become what was then called the permanent secretary at Aston University Students' Union, Aston Students' Guild, Aston Guild of Students, has had all those names over the years. That was really weird because I was employed by the university, and the relationship between the senior staff member and the university has always been slightly bizarre there. And I didn't know what I was doing at all. I was 26. I was actually 25 when I was offered the job. We had 90 staff. We ran a nursery, catering, print, the chaplaincy, and all these things that I had, let me be honest, not a clue about. And imposter syndrome was big, and the shoulder pads were big, because I felt I had to. It was the late 80s, early 90s. I had to assert my position. Most of my colleagues in the sector were male, and mostly anyone who knows the student union sector will know they were very confident men. And I was this bright young slip of a lass who didn't really know how I'd managed to get to this position, and was struggling to find my place in it. And I had 6.5 years there, very happy, very distressful, very up, very down, very like every student union year. I learned so much, and I think I probably embedded nothing. What I learned was how things work. I didn't really learn about how to develop an organisation. We made some good changes, we did some good stuff. And then I moved to Staff's University Student Union, who wanted a strategic leader. Well, they say they wanted it. They didn't all want it, and that had its own problems. And it was a long way from home. And it was 2 sites that were 10, 12 miles apart. And I became quite ill, actually. I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and it wasn't my finest place there, although I did embed some stuff, because they still use the same visual identity, and the guy who took over from me is still there. And it was great to work in a different part of the sector. I'd never been that close to the new universities, so it was really interesting to work there. But I came back and I moved to an arts centre, so this desire to work in the arts was still there. And I worked there for 2 or 3 years. I really missed the students. I couldn't understand what I missed at first. Everything was quiet and predictable. And I just thought that was really a peculiar way to work, in a quiet and predictable place. And I realised it was because I didn't have the officers bounding in through my door every day. And I didn't have any real sense of who this was for. And I really struggled with that. It's really important to me to know that student unions are for their members, and the members own it, and therefore everything we do should be for them. And I found all that a bit peculiar. I went on maternity leave. I had a child while I was there. I'm not sure I would ever have done that. My husband was also a chief exec of a students' union, and I'm not sure 2 chief execs of a student. I didn't feel 2 chief execs of student unions could have a baby. So I had one when I was in the arts. I wasn't the senior manager. I was the deputy director, deputy chief exec in that role. So that seemed easier. There's nothing easy about having a child and being a senior manager, I should say. Absolutely nothing easy. Lots of delight, but not much that's easy. Anyway, she was born, and once I'd got past, I don't know, I think when she became a toddler, somebody approached me to say there's a job in a Birmingham-based student union. Are you interested? And I was Birmingham-based throughout all of this time. So yes, I decided I was, and I went to work at Birmingham City Student Union. And that was great. Again, I learned a lot, and I learned much more about embedding, and I learned how to make change stick, I think. And I started to understand what I believed in, and that hadn't been clear throughout my career. I remember watching a more experienced colleague once say, I got a new job, and I spoke to the staff and I said, well, this is what I believe in. And I looked at him and I thought, God, how lovely to be able to say that. And I learned that at Birmingham City. And then a job came up at Southampton. This was a massive life change for us because we moved the family, well, in two directions. My husband was at Loughborough and we moved to Southampton, me and my daughter. And Andy used to come down and visit. A non-affiliate, the first time I'd ever worked in a non-affiliate, which wasn't actually the major issue about it once we were there. The major issue about it was that it was really quite old-fashioned. And some of that was really brilliant and gorgeous and important. And some of it was really dangerous and damaging. And the trick there, I think, that we had to play was to keep the stuff that was exciting. The students really still had a lot of influence over their organisation compared to other student unions because they'd been, that's how it had stayed. You know, my predecessor was very much a civil servant as opposed to a dynamic, striving charity chief exec, which I think is where we've tended to go. So that was really fascinating. Moving south didn't really cut it for us. Sheffield came up. Sheffield's been the #1 students' union in the country, in my mind, since the turn of the millennium. And when I went to work in the arts, there was no clear lead student union. When I came back, everyone was talking about Sheffield. That was about 2001. And I was like, what happened there then? What have they done? So I've had the chance to find out. And I was appointed 7 years ago in June 2014. And it's an incredible privilege to be the chief exec of what I personally believe, although the accolades are a bit thin on the ground this year across the sector, but still the best student union in the country, perhaps even the world. And here I am to this day.
And what about the student movement appeals to you?
In a nutshell, I think it is the infrastructure that allows people to govern their own destinies. Whether that is, I want to learn to dance, so I'm going to hang out with a load of other people who want to learn to dance and I'm going to make that happen. Or whether it is the quality of my teaching and learning isn't good enough. Or whether it is, you know, really LGBT people should be able to marry each other, that should be an okay thing. Or whether it's, I want to buy sustainable goods in the shop. I think that's what it is. It is that student unions create that space, and that in the greatest student unions, students grab that by the horns and really bring it to life. And you look at how society has changed, and it's always a few steps behind student unions. And, you know, as a more senior member of the community these days, there's been some challenges for me in that, because I'm starting to, you know, that postcard where they say you be warned that you don't become the people that your parents warned you about, you know, you become the enemy because you do get out of touch with the current thinking. And there's quite a lot of current thinking at the moment that I have to say, I have to really think about. And I have to remind myself that if this is what students are saying today, and they're still saying it a few years in, probably it's what the whole of society will be thinking in the future. And I think that's really exciting. What a privileged place to be. So I think it's about, yeah, creating space for people to have control over their own lives.
If you could name 3 sort of personal traits or characteristics that you think have helped you get to where you are today, what would they be?
This is an unlikely way of describing it, but I think boredom. So I wouldn't have ever said I was ambitious. You know, I was a mediocre student. I mean, I went to a Russell Group university, but I got a really pretty rubbish degree because I spent all my time in the ENTS office running events, which was great fun and useful today. but I was always interested in what was next. And if someone said you could do it, I was inclined to believe them. And so I did it. So most of my moves have been because something wasn't quite right for me in my life. And often that was because I'd got to the point where I'd done what I thought I could do. And I was getting a bit bored. So I started looking for what might come next. Because I've always been the senior person, apart from in the arts, I've always been the senior person. So I didn't have to rise through the ranks of a staff team. I had to rise through the scale of the movement. I've always contributed nationally until very recently. I suppose it dropped off a bit when I had a child, because you just can't do everything. Apparently you can. People think you can, but you can't. Don't believe any of that. You just can't, and just don't. But prior to that, I was on the national committee. I was on national committees as a student officer and all the way through, and I think that really helped people know and trust me. So when I went for an interview, that helped. I have to say, in the early days, it also helped being a woman who was apparently vaguely competent, because not least because in the interview, when they're talking about the candidates, I was the only woman. So they wouldn't be talking about, the guy with the blue tie. They'd be talking about, well, she was the woman. Oh right, okay, I remember her. So I did stand out in that way. But I think doing work nationally helped position me in the movement as someone who could be trusted. And then sort of itchy feet really made me say, and I didn't want to go sideways. I wanted just a bit more. I've done that challenge. What's the next challenge? It was really mostly about what's the next challenge. And, in some ways, Sheffield, for me, the challenge was, this is a great organisation. A lot of the other organisations I'd gone to needed some kind of fixing, some kind of modernising, some kind of bright new strategy. Sheffield didn't need any of that. Sheffield is a great place and has been for decades. So that was the challenge for me with this last job. It's turned out not to be the case, because when you get a global pandemic, you lean back on all your old, oh my God, how do we get out of this mess that we're in? So that's been quite interesting. But yeah, positioning myself, what's my next challenge? Did you ask for 3 things?
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty good at what I do, and I don't think I've ever said that publicly, and I don't think I always feel it. But I think my belief in student leadership and my ability to understand the whole organisation, which most people in student unions don't, they understand their part of it, makes me quite good at what I do.
Amazing, thank you. And what does CPD, both formal but not formal as well, look like for you in your role?
I think I've got a bit lazy about it.
No, totally. But the one thing that I think about when I've been having these conversations with people is how different everyone's answers are. Because actually, when I think about my career in students' unions, there's not a single course that I remember, but I do remember a situation that I've been in where I've gone, actually, I need to dig our way out of this.
Right.
And that's where all my learning has happened. So actually, I've been quite surprised of how many people have gone, well, actually, that course, when actually, I don't think that's the beauty of students' unions, really.
So, there were some courses, certainly in my early days, and I think it's a real shame they're not available anymore. So there was a Women Managers Development Programme that I went on, there was quite a model for 2.5-day residential courses. There was Management Skills 1 and 2, which I did, taught how to discipline someone. Women Leadership, where, we did the classic track your career stuff and just listen to other women speak. And I've been blessed in my life that nobody ever told me I couldn't do anything because I was a woman. And I was on a course with people who did think they couldn't do it because they were a woman. I found that quite incredible and terrifying. And I think one of the things I've done through my career is I've stopped worrying about the detail. I don't need to know how to do this stuff, but I do want to know that it's going to happen. So that idea of what do I believe in, what am I, what's important to me, has become more important over my career. So the principles I work around are what's really important. So at work, I'm always the one lifting us all up and saying, yeah, no, not that detail, not what will the procedure say, but why have we even got a policy, is the sort of development that moving into progressively larger and more complex organisations has given me. And the development of working with brilliantly competent senior managers who, they're more experienced than I was 10 years ago. And yet I was running a whole organisation 10 years ago. So why am I still pretending to do their bit? You know, I was doing what they were doing. Why am I still doing that? Let them do it. And if you're letting them do it, which you should, what the hell are you doing? And it's got to be about looking from higher up and further out. And I think that's what I've tried to do. And, you know, one of the big challenges going to Sheffield is we were getting 95, 96% satisfaction rates. There is no improving that. And a member of staff said to me, maybe we should measure something different, which I just thought was brilliant, because there were plenty of things we weren't getting 9 out of 10 on, like how happy are our students. And so we developed a strategy that was completely different and measures different things. And that gave us all stretch, because suddenly we were being told, well, actually, the students aren't that happy with their academic experience. Oh, right, OK, well, we can do something about that. So that was about looking further out. You know, what is it that makes a great students' union? So I think the move through has made me adjust my filters. And then I've leaned on courses and volunteering, and, you know, I've been a trustee of lots of other organisations because it develops me and because I think I've got something to offer. And I take each bit of new thinking into that role and, you know, apply it and work it out and practice it and mess it up.
And you've talked a lot about the how much you sort of love student leadership. I suppose what, for somebody that hasn't been in students' unions before,
Okay.
what is the role of a student leader versus a staff leader in a students' union?
Well, I think for me, there are two parts to it. One is that the political leadership has to come from the students. And actually, we're starting to really talk about them more as student activists. But as chief exec, my interest is in the leadership of the activists. So helping students be great politicians, representatives, and so on, because only they can do that. It's none of our business what the policy says, as long as it's legal. And even then, we can have a policy that asks for something that isn't currently legal. So that is none of our business. What is our business is making sure they have good processes to come to those decisions, making sure they're well supported, making sure they're trained. And I think, as a chief exec, inspiring them to be better than they ever thought possible in regard to their responsibilities. Then I think there's the whole organisational piece. And I think it gets really blurred there. But I've had conversations with colleagues where they say, what if the students make the wrong decision? To which I say there's only two reasons why they make the wrong decision. One is because they haven't been given the information they need to make the right decision. And the other is because you simply disagree with their decision. And in both cases, you're wrong, because you should either have given them the right information or you should just suck it up and say that's what they're going to do, because it's their organisation. So I think the shared leadership internally in student unions is still really quite challenging. I think it's the most unusual part of our organisations. You know, who's the chief exec of our student union? Well, when Beth, our president, is on Radio 4 talking about tuition fees, she's the chief exec. She's the chief everything. And compared to normal organisations, I would be doing that. Well, thank God I don't have to, because I'd be awful. She's great at it. You know, that's not where my strengths lie. My strength's in saying to her, you'll be great at this. Have you got it covered? Are you prepared? Do you know what you're saying? And so on.
And what's been your biggest learning during your time working in students' unions?
Well, what thing have I learned? Or what?
Yeah, I suppose so. What's the biggest thing you've learned?
I think this partly comes, you know, with getting older. You know, people say I know less, and what is that? There's a phrase, isn't there, that people say about getting older? You know less, but there's more. You know, there's more to know, or something. I know far less now. I'm sure about far less. The one thing I am sure about is that I'm right about that. And you know, back in the day, I probably also thought I was right, that I knew everything, but I'm damn sure now I didn't. That there are many more people in the world who are better at things than I am, and I should support them to continue being better at it, because that will make us all better. So I think the most important learning is you don't have to do it all yourself. In fact, what you need to do is surround yourself by brilliant people and set a clear direction and sit back and watch. And that actually, it's a bit like a perfect exam question, isn't it? The better you get at writing essays, the easier the essays are to write and the shorter they are. And I feel a bit like that in my career. The stuff that this last year, my heart really goes out to people at the beginning of their careers in these seats. Because I found it utterly stressful, really exhausting, very emotionally hard, very difficult to lead consistently to a team of people who are going through so many different things. But I could not have done it in any of my previous jobs to the same standard as I've done it this last year, because I know what I'm doing and I've learned so much, and I've learned who's got the strengths around me. So I think the student union underestimates the importance of experience, and I'm really glad I have it now, because I lean on it an awful lot. But I think that giving people the headspace to be the best they can be is the right way to run organisations.
And if you had a piece of advice for someone that's about to start their career in students' unions as a staff member, what would it be?
Strap in tight. If you don't love students and the idea that this is theirs, move on. And be really honest with yourself about that. You have, you know, I've over the years, I've heard so many really negative comments about students in students' unions. I just think, you know, there are things students do that drive me potty. You know, particularly as I've got older and I've gone through having, you know, my daughter's the same age as students now, and I'm like, oh God, are they doing that in that way that one does about people who aren't like them sometimes? But I would absolutely defend to the end their right to do these things, because it's their, or you know, fundamentally it's their organisation. If you're not happy to work for an organisation that belongs to students, then you should go and work for a different one.
What has been the highlight of your SU career to date?
The highlight, I tell you what today is. It's 25 years since me and my husband got married today, and we met through student unions. So that's been a bit of a highlight. The other highlights, I think, are probably working with some of the best individuals in the world. As I've learned so much from student officers. I bore people with the stories about what I've learned from student officers over the years. Not all of them, but you know, over the years. So that's been a real highlight. And then a couple of awards are a real highlight to me. One of them was when at Southampton we were awarded Silver IIP the day before I left, actually. And I'd been there 5 years, and I began the year with an appeal on a discipline and an industrial tribunal, and ended the time with a Silver IIP. So that Investors in People, that was great. And then the first time we were physically given an award as the #1 students' union, which was the Worcester. I lose track of how many years ago. And we took it off Loughborough, actually, which is always a pleasure because that's where my husband worked. But actually, it was just the, you know, when they read out your name to being the best in your industry, that's a pretty warm glow. I'm also really proud of our current strategy. I think it's pretty innovative and very special. I've probably got
amazing.
But yeah.
Yeah, I bet. And why do you love SUs?
Because they create the space for students to do brilliant and amazing things that make the world a better place. That's it. That's why.
And if you had a piece of advice for a newly elected officer in students' unions, what would it be?
Strap in. Well, what I say to them is suck the marrow out of this opportunity. This is a privileged opportunity. This isn't a job. It's a vocation for a year. And you're only committed to a year unless you work for NUS as an officer, but mostly you're only committed for a year. It's a year like no other you will ever have. You will have the highest highs and the lowest lows. And even with my perspective of much life since my officer year, it is an outstanding year in my life. It's the best and worst times, and you should just throw everything you've got into it, but look after your mental health and well-being.
And on that, what's your tip to promote a healthy work-life balance?
Know what you want to do outside of work and make time to do it. Do not compromise. I think if you were asking me about regrets, I do regret not spending more time with my child as she grew up. I regret putting work first because I thought I had no alternative, and now I've got age and experience on my side. I know I could have done differently, but I was too scared because I thought the organisation would judge me. Well, they could have judged me, and if they judged me to the point of sacking me, that's fine. You know, with hindsight, I would have spent more time with my child. So never put work before your child, which is why I said, are you all right to do this today? Or before your family, or before your, what's important to you. Because work's really important and career's really important, but there is nothing as important as the love of good people around you and the support you need to give them. So you do just have to do it. You have to make the time. And I think as part of that, you have to have some things you like to do. One of the other things about being this age is the empty nest stuff. So my daughter's now at university and she doesn't live here. Blimey, that leaves a hole. And I wasn't really, it's taken me a few years to really get my head into what do I want to fill that hole with for me, because I haven't asked about me for, I don't know how many years, 20 odd years. What do I want? Because I'm always well, I mean, my family wouldn't say this, actually. They think I'm really bossy, but and I am really bossy, and I'm very proud to be bossy. But they wouldn't say that. But I do very often say, well, I'm easy. What do you want to do? I'll do what you want to do. Because I haven't known what I like. So know what you like and do it.
And do you think some of those things that you mentioned have been harder for you because you've been a senior woman in this industry for so long?
Yes. Yeah.
And you were there before anyone else, weren't
you?
Like you set the way in a lot of ways.
Yes, and I've got not many stories for saying what generation I am. I don't have many stories because I've worked in student unions, and we are pretty good compared to other sectors. And some of the stuff that other people in other sectors come across, I think, is shocking. But of course, I've got an array of stories, and I think my most depressing one really is when I was at a national conference. I'd organised a women's space for women to speak without the blokes. And I was in the bar with the general managers, who were all blokes, and I looked at my watch and I was like, oh no, I'm late for the women's section, whatever. Oh, you and your women, they said. So off I go, thinking, oh well, that's what it's like, I expect that, I've been used to that for years. I arrive into the space where the women were meeting and I said, I'm really sorry, I got caught up in a conversation with the other general managers. Oh, you and your general managers, they said. And I was like, do you know, actually, I think I'm done with this now. I don't need to be always the bad guy. Does nobody else feel this conflict that you get all the time? That to me was one of the worst moments in my career in student unions in terms of being a woman, senior woman, because nobody wanted me. Everyone said, you're not us.
Yeah, and there's so many stories that you can. I think you're right. In students' unions, we are really lucky at our general culture, aren't we? And we are such a forward-thinking sector as it is that actually now we've created spaces for women and people of colour and to thrive in this sector, but it doesn't mean it hasn't come as a cost for you that we're doing it before anyone else, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think
really set in that way.
The women's stuff that's happening now, I think, is really important and very exciting. And I'm really glad there are women doing that work. But I am tired. I'm tired of the fact it still needs to exist. It really upsets me. I remember, and I do struggle. One of the things I struggle with in student unions is, we've never done this before. And when you've been around as long as I've been around, damn fine, we've all done it 10 times before. But the memories are very short. They're only about 2 or 3 years long in student unions. So I'm really glad that none of the women are saying, well, we've never done this before, but I think what we should do is, and they reel off a load of things that we were doing in the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, and they just, they did work. We're right to keep doing them. I was one of 5 when I started. About 10 years ago, there were 5 Jackies who were chief execs. That's a remarkable shit. We weren't the only women. And I think it's taken a dip just now, and I think it does need a boost. I also think the job needs looking at, and it is a very easy job for women to do. I mean, it's not a very easy job for anyone, but it's particularly hard for women, I think. I think culturally, time pressures, the burden you carry. I've known lots of women. Ironically, over my career, I'd say most men have left because they were asked to, and most women have left because they chose to. And I think that's really quite a damning reflection on why people leave the movement.
In your head, think of the characteristics of the most effective officer you've ever worked with, why have they been the most effective officer you've ever worked with?
Okay, so the first thing I think the most effective officers have is a desire that is supported by the membership as a whole to make something be different for students. And then they have the classic leadership traits of being able to really simply articulate what that change is and to relentlessly drive that change and to have the conversations, the very hard conversations with the right people to make those changes happen. And a lot of that is about building up trust and respect. And I think and also to be a team player, I think, and to be part of the whole organisation, but also particularly part of their officer team in a team spirited way. But I think it's classic leadership skills. Know what you want to achieve, be able to bring people along with you, and don't be afraid of having the difficult conversations with the people you need to influence, and be ready to, you've got to be persuasive to make it happen.